Hi, I'm Gabriel Wilensky, founder of Thought Academy. If you're like a lot of the people that I work with who are really just getting started with developing their critical thinking skills, or you're thinking about getting started, then this workshop will be incredibly important for you. This is the type of workshop I wish I had when I was starting my career in the software industry, where I had to confront shoddy thinking many times. You may be just starting out in your own journey to improve your thinking skills, and perhaps you are where I was when I started. I remember it very well, and it's been a long journey. I am so excited you have decided to join me and start a journey of your own.
You know, obviously all human beings think. We all think about what we do or what not to do, what to accept or reject, what is important and what is not, decide who to be friends with and who are our enemies, what is true, what is false, who we should marry, and so much more. Our thinking is indeed responsible for everything we do or don't do in life. It should come as no surprise to you then that the quality of your thinking will have a direct correlation with the quality of your life. If you lack good critical thinking skills, you will likely be a marionette responding, usually without even realizing it, to someone else's strengths. You will be like a boat in the ocean with no sails or rows pushed around by the currents. Look, ultimately, it doesn't matter what the circumstances of your life are. It doesn't matter where you live, where you work, and who you socialize with. Your performance as a professional, as a citizen, as a lover, as a parent, as a friend, all of that will be improving as your thinking skills improve. Becoming a good critical thinker requires that you learn and practice good habits of mind. It will take perseverance and dedication. This is not an overnight process. I am telling you, it will take work. But if you follow the advice we give you at Thought Academy, you will see that we will provide you with the advice and tools you will need to make the transition from an unsophisticated thinker to a good critical thinker. We will help you to learn and practice to think about your thoughts. How are they coming about? What is triggering them? What is influencing them? How to improve them. Once you start understanding your mind, you will also begin to see what is causing your problems. When your thinking is leading you to make the wrong decisions, associate yourself with the wrong people, align yourself with the wrong causes, or buy things you don't need or even really want, you will understand the mechanisms of self-deception and understand how this very natural mechanism of the mind can be so bad for us and for the betterment of the world.
The possibilities for improvement are amazing. You can already imagine it. You become more skeptical and you automatically begin to question the things you read, you hear, or see in the news. You become more likely to recognize how mass media is influencing your life. You learn how to assess if the assumptions that lead you to conclusions are justifiable. You become more reasonable and open to others changing your views, if the new views are better. You learn to be more concerned with the needs of all people, not just your own needs, those of your family or ethnic group or nation. Yet, you may be wondering whether this may actually work for you. All these things make sense, and you know folks who are good critical thinkers and are capable of making good decisions. But could you actually become one of them too? Perhaps you feel you are too old for this, that your mind is already set in the ways you learned as a child or as a young person. Perhaps you're really busy in your life with all the personal and professional obligations. That's where I was when I started. The bottom line is that all these things can be overcome. You want to make sure you are on the right path. You want to make sure you are given the tools you need in easy to understand and digest format. Because, let's be frank, you do not have the time or inclination to study dense academic texts. I can remember when I was exactly in that spot. What I wanted was a simple guide to lead me to a better understanding of my own thinking. I wanted tools and techniques to help me think about my own thinking. So, Let me make this very simple for you.
I have been coaching folks on how to think critically for many years. I have been in the software industry for a very long time and have worked on dozens of software products. Many times I've had to confront fuzzy thinking, challenge assumptions, coach folks to question those assumptions about things such as what the users wanted or needed, what the market could bear, and what the competition was doing, what features to do, which to discard. I've had to break down in detail the user interaction with certain products or features, help folks construct and defend good arguments, and much, much more. The results of these efforts were very positive. Of the dozens of products I developed, at least 5 were used by over 1 million people each, and collectively, my products are used by over 30 million people everywhere around the world. And then I had to do a much more serious critical thinking study in a different way for an entirely different project. When I wrote my history book, 6 Million Crucifixions, I was confronted with some of the most pernicious consequences of bad thinking. I studied and broke down the thought processes that led people to relinquish their rational faculties. I exposed the superstition, manipulation, ingrained sociocentric beliefs, and ancient hatreds which had been learned without questioning from figures of authority, and showed how that infected the minds of masses of unreflective thinkers. I dealt with this systematically, not only in the book itself, but also later on in the many public talks and lectures I gave, and even on the radio interviews that followed. This book was well received by scholars in the Holocaust studies and religious fields and the reviewing press, but more importantly, helped many readers open up their eyes to prejudices and biases they didn't even know they had, and helped them understand the process through which these pernicious prejudices become the core of their belief systems.
On a lighter, more amusing and personal note, I have applied the critical thinking principles we discuss at Thought Academy to the raising of my son, who is now 13. Ever since he could understand language, I have systematically taught him to evaluate and solve problems, think rationally, be reasonable, question authority, and be respectful and considerate to the needs and feelings of others. I developed a system for teaching him how to be skeptical and to wonder how things worked. I taught him to appreciate science, to question everything, and to always give precedence to evidence. I taught him to think about the things he saw or heard, and always to think for himself and make up his own mind about things. In other words, over the years I developed a method for turning him into a little thinking machine. As a result of this, now every time I tell him anything or ask him to do anything, he questions it and requires an explanation or justification. It can be a lot of work, and it was certainly easier when he was accepting these things without questioning like most little children do. But I am ultimately happy he is doing it. It is serving him well in school, and it will serve him well later on in life once he is faced with the further complications of adult life.
One of the aspects of becoming a better critical thinker is to learn how to identify when and how newscasters, media we consume from all sorts of sources, and politicians are manipulating us. So, out of the many topics we'll be covering at Thought Academy, I chose these 3 to discuss on this workshop. On this first video, I am going to focus on how the news media influences us. This is going to be helpful to you regardless of whether you are a news junkie or you don't even own a TV set. The reason why is because the media's influence is pervasive at all levels of our life. It may not be influencing you directly, but it's certainly influencing your children's teacher, your spouse, your congressman, and perhaps even your priest. You may never turn the news on, but most other people certainly do. What I'm going to teach you is how this works and some of the things to keep your eye open for to avoid being manipulated or influenced by it. Once you understand this, it will be like learning the trick the magician performs on stage. Once you understand how it's done, how it works on you, the magic is gone. the trick ceases to have the same effect on you. So get ready to unmask some of the techniques these professional manipulators use and learn the antidote to fight them. I think you're going to love it. In every country of the world, prevailing cultural norms and socioeconomic characteristics influence and mold the news media. This makes perfect sense, since the people who work in the news media share the same views as their audience. This is also the case because they need to sell the kinds of products or services the people in their audience want to buy. Now, since the news media is driven by profits, it needs to present the news in ways that are appealing and understandable to their audience. One common technique they use is to be alarmists. Pay attention next time you watch the news and you'll see a common pattern where things tend to sound pretty bad. The threat of terrorism is increasing, the crime rate continues to go up while police brutality continues unabated, the stock market is going down, and so on and so forth. Typically, there are a few mechanisms at work in the coverage from the mainstream news media in any culture. These mechanisms may operate at an unconscious level, but regardless, the consequences are that the public gets a biased perspective of reality. First, oftentimes, the stories that are presented as the most important are those that are the most interesting or sensational to the news media audience. Now, you may think that news coverage of celebrities, lifestyle and entertainment is important, or you may think or like coverage of sensational sex, crime or court stories. And that's why very frequently these stories take all the time and space in the news, to the detriment of news of real weight and value, such as important political or cultural world events or discoveries in science. Second, in the news coverage, some countries are praised while some others are criticized. Once you start paying attention to this, you'll notice that typically the countries that deserve praise are those that are friendly to us, while those that deserve criticism are those that are unfriendly to us. Third, news coverage often presents things as the way things are. However, this only happens because that's how things appear to them from their point of view. If the thing in question, such as an event for example, was looked at from a different perspective, it would likely be presented differently. Perhaps not as a fact, not as if that was just the way it is, but rather it would be presented with a different meaning. Fourth, when the news media evaluate stories, they may look for the facts that support their views. Typically, these are the facts that will be presented as the most important or relevant facts. But they may be irrelevant or unimportant when looked at from a different perspective. So what can we do? How are we to interpret the information we're being fed? Well, as always, you should evaluate all information critically. In this particular case, it would be helpful to be in the lookout for some patterns. For instance, next time you read the newspaper, pay attention to the order of the articles. Notice how articles that are not really that important appear on the front page, while more important articles are buried deep inside the publication. Also, notice how the news media often targets whatever stories they can sensationalize, and how they focus on stories their audience would find sensational, while ignoring or minimizing stories that are truly important or deep. You will often find important world problems are ignored or downplayed, while sensational or ultimately unimportant stories are highlighted. Note how the so-called friends of our country are typically presented positively, while our, quote, enemies are presented negatively. Notice how newscasts oversimplify complex issues. Pay attention to how they create and foment social unrest by overexploiting stories typically revolving around sexuality or criminal behavior. So, let me give you 14 strategies you may use to see through the news media. 1. When you consume news stories, take the time to evaluate them for their clarity, accuracy, relevancy, significance, depth, and breadth. 2.
2. When you hear a news story, consider how it will be told from other perspectives. Always study alternative perspectives and worldviews. 3. Try to learn about the reality that surrounds you from multiple sources of thought and information, instead of just relying exclusively on the news media. 4. When you hear a news story, identify the viewpoints embedded in them and think about whether the story would be presented differently from another viewpoint. 5. Understand that the news stories you read or hear are almost certainly a combination of fact and interpretation, which means that ultimately are just one way of interpreting reality. 6. Notice inconsistencies and contradictions in the news. Many times, stories are put together from multiple sources and the message is contradictory. 7. Try to identify the agenda or interests a particular story may serve. Do what lawyers do. Ask yourself the question, who benefits? Another way to see this is to follow the money, basically. 8. Notice what may be explicitly omitted and yet implied. This is typically an indication that someone wants you to think in a certain way. 9. Notice that some facts may be covered while others may be ignored. Ask yourself why. 10. Pay attention to which points of view are systematically presented favorably and which unfavorably. Again, this will typically reflect the presenter's bias. 11. Observe that sometimes social conventions or taboos are used inappropriately to define issues as unethical. Here's a clear case of the newscaster trying to imprint his bias on you. 12. Notice and decide if things that are represented as fact should instead be presented as debatable or as opinion. 13. Pay attention to the assumptions implicit in stories. 14. When you hear stories that show a bias towards the sensational, overly dramatic, or unusual, mentally put them into perspective or discount them outright. So there you have it. That's a brief overview of how the news media may distort reality or manipulate or mislead you. So at this point, the big question is, how does all this apply to you? How are you going to use all this? You probably fall into one of the following categories. You never watch or read the news media. You watch or read the news, but it doesn't seem to have any effect on you. You watch or read the news media, and you end up being agitated by it. If you're in the first group, that is, you do not watch the news, you may think you need not care about any of this. But you would be wrong, because even if you do not watch the news at all, you do not live in a vacuum. You still, one way or another, hear what's going on. You talk to friends or colleagues, you talk to someone in the coffee shop or gym, you see the headlines in the newspapers as you walk by the magazine stand. Your phone brings up news alerts. Look, unless you are a hermit living in a remote cave, it's very hard to really stay away from all of this. So you need an antidote. Even if you're in the second category, that is, you watch the news but you feel you are above being influenced by it, think again. News media is presenting a biased reality to its audience, while of course trying to persuade you they are neutral and unbiased. What you perceive of what's going on, if you watch uncritically, is a reflection of what the news media wants you to know. It may or may not be a true reflection of what's really important, or may not be an objective and unbiased perception of reality. You may end up thinking that things are really bad, when in reality you were just presented with sensational and negative things. So whether you like it or not, you're being influenced by the news media. In other words, you still need an antidote. And if you're in the third category, that is, you are whipped into a state of hysteria by the mass media, and you're always worried about crime, terrorism, corruption, drugs, and any number of bad things, well, needless to say, in this case, you definitely need an antidote too. Well, if you fall into any of these categories, I gave you an antidote already. I gave you some strategies you can actually use to avoid being misled or scared by the news media. You may start applying these strategies today, and if you are intentional about applying them regularly and systematically, you will notice you will become impervious to the effect of the news media has on you in a very short time. On the second video in this series, which will become available in a couple of days, we are going to be looking at the ideas that are spread by television, movies, the internet, and of course advertising. And I will be giving you some strategies on how to deal with that sort of onslaught and avoid being manipulated. What would being a good critical thinker do for you? What would it mean for your career? How would it impact your ability to earn money? How would it help you better argue your points and to communicate more effectively with others? Please scroll down below this video, tell me in the comment section below or on the Thought Academy Facebook page. I promise I will read all comments and reply to as many as I can, if not all. And of course, if you liked this video and you found it useful, I would love it if you shared it with your friends. You know, when I started with this project, which incidentally is one of the topics of a new book I'm working on, a lot of people were really skeptical. Friends, family, people who were close to me were saying I wouldn't be able to do this or I shouldn't do it, that people are stuck in their ways and are immovable. I was told I would be fighting windmills. But I disagree. I am hopeful people can improve. If you take nothing else from this video, please understand this. We can make the world a better place if we change and improve certain things. But changing policies is not enough and won't really matter very much unless we also change people. And change comes in many different flavors, but at the core of everything we do is our thinking. So let's start there. Let's make the world a better place by making people better thinkers. So once again, please scroll down and share your thoughts in the comment section below or on the Thought Academy Facebook page. Engage in dialogue with other members of the Thought Academy community. Tell me what you think. I will see you in the next video. Bye for now.